All right, folks, here we go for section 5. Let's enjoy it. So there's your focus question, and we'll start from there. By the mid 1500s, the Spanish had established an enormous global colonial empire from Europe to the Americas and Asia. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were now highways moving people and goods, including gold and silver shipped from Mexico and Peru to Spain and on to the Philippines and China. The Spanish Empire encompassed the most populous and mineral rich areas of the New World and included large cities such as Mexico City. The Spanish system of colonial government was an elaborate hierarchy of appointed lawyers and bureaucrats under the authority of the Spanish monarchy, with a significant role for the Catholic Church, especially in administering Indians. Elected assemblies were absent. Royal officials were often appointed from Spain rather than Creoles, persons born in the colonies of European ancestry. The imperial state was a real and continuous presence in Spanish America, but as its power declined, local elites gained more authority. The Spanish did not import enslaved Africans in large numbers because they relied on the dwindling but still substantial Indian population to do hard agriculture and mining labor in mines and on haciendas. The Spanish government barred non Christians and non Spaniards from emigrating to the colonies, but many from Spain made the voyage, drawn by opportunities for social advancement. The initial emigrants were men, laborers, craftsmen, soldiers, officials, priests, professionals, and minor aristocrats. However, whole families would eventually emigrate as well. Peninsulares, or persons of European birth, were atop the social hierarchy, though they were only a tiny portion of the population. Indians always outnumbered European colonists in New Spain, and large areas remained effectively under their control. Spanish authorities emphasized the assimilation of these inhabitants into colonial society. The crown ordered that married men bring their wives to the colonies and that single men must marry. However, with a low population of unmarried Spanish women, colonial and indigenous populations intermarried. The Spanish government formally endorsed the practice, viewing it as a form of Christianizing the Indian population. By 1600, mestizos made up a large part of the population, and Spanish America evolved into a hybrid culture, but with a single official faith, language, and government. An example of the hybrid nature of the culture was Juan Diego's 1531 report of seeing a vision of the Virgin Mary as a dark-skinned Indian near a Mexican village. Miracles were reported, a shrine was built in Mary's honor, and the Virgin of Guadalupe would come to be a symbol of the mixing of Indian and Spanish cultures, and later of the modern nation of Mexico. Europeans brought missionary zeal to spread what they saw as the benefits of their own civilization to others, while reaping the rewards of empire. The establishment of Spain's empire in America took place in the wake of its own territorial unification, the rise of a powerful royal government, and the expulsion of Muslims and Jews in 1492. To further legitimize Spain's claim to rule the Americas a year after Columbus's first voyage, Pope Alexander VI divided the non-Christian world between Spain and Portugal, declaring that most of the Americas belonged to Spain and most of Africa belonged to Portugal. The Pope justified this pronouncement by requiring Spain and Portugal to spread Catholicism. European Christians became religious rivals in the 16th century when the Protestant Reformation divided the Catholic Church. In 1517, Martin Luther, a German priest, posted his 95 Theses, which accused the Church of worldliness and corruption. Luther wanted to cleanse the Church of abuses such as the sale of indulgences, or official dispensations for forgiving sins. He insisted that all believers should read the Bible for themselves rather than relying on priests to interpret it for them. His call for reform led to the rise of new Protestant churches independent of Rome and plunged Europe into more than a century of religious and political strife. Spain, the most powerful bastion of Orthodox Catholicism, redoubled its efforts to convert Indians to the true faith. National glory and religious missions went hand in hand. Convinced of the superiority of Catholicism to all other religions, Spain insisted that the primary goal of colonization was to save Indians from heathenism and prevent them from falling under the sway of Protestantism. The aim was neither to exterminate nor remove Indians, but to transform them into obedient Christian subjects of the crown. Indeed, lacking the later concept of race as an unchanging inborn set of qualities and abilities, many Spanish writers insisted that Indians could in time be brought up to the level of European civilization. To them, this transition would require not only the destruction of native political structures, but also a transformation of their economic and spiritual lives. Religious orders established missions throughout the empire, and over time, millions converted to Catholicism. So here we have a rock painting by a native artist in southwest Texas, and engravings from the Florentine Codex. Spaniards agreed that Indians should become Catholics, but they argued over the balance between conversion and profits. The conquistadors often used brutal violence to force native men and women to submit to them, violence that many Christians found inconsistent with the mandate to convert and civilize Indians. As early as 1537, Pope Paul III, who hoped to see Indians become devout subjects of Catholic monarchs, outlawed their enslavement, an edict that never extended to apply to Africans. His decree declared Indians to be truly men who must not be treated as dumb beasts. Starting in the 1520s, the Dominican priest Bartolomé de las Casas wrote accounts of brutal Spanish atrocities toward the native people of the Caribbean islands. Las Casas' father had sailed on Columbus's second voyage, and he himself had participated in the conquest of Cuba. But in 1514, Las Casas freed his own Indian slaves and began to preach against the injustices of Spanish rule. Las Casas' writings denounced Spain for causing the death of millions of innocent people. He narrated in shocking details the strange cruelties carried out by the Christians, including the burning alive of men, women, and children, and the imposition of forced labor. Las Casas insisted that Spain had no grounds on which to deprive them of their lands and liberty. Las Casas also suggested that importing slaves from Africa would help protect the Indians from exploitation. Largely because of Las Casas' efforts, Spain in 1542 issued a proclamation that became known as the New Laws, commanding that Indians no longer be enslaved. And the government established a repartimiento system whereby native towns were required to provide a fixed amount of labor each year on Spanish mines or farms. As tributary towns, they were ruled by native leaders and lived according to their own laws and customs as long as they paid their annual tribute. Las Casas' writings, translated into several European languages, contributed to the spread of the Black Legend, the image of Spain as a uniquely brutal and exploitive colonizer. In reality, all empires were highly exploitative, but the Black Legend would provide a potent justification for other European powers to challenge Spain's predominance in the Americas. While the Spanish Empire centered on Mexico, Peru, and the West Indies, the hope of finding a new kingdom of gold soon led Spanish explorers into new territory. In 1508, Spain established the first permanent colony in what is now the United States. The first colony was not, as many people believe, at Jamestown, Virginia, or at St. Augustine, Florida, but on the island of Puerto Rico, now a U.S. Commonwealth. Unlike many other places Europeans explored north of Mexico, Puerto Rico had gold. Juan Ponce de Leon, who led the colony, sent a considerable amount to Spain, while keeping some for himself. In 1513, Ponce de Leon embarked for Florida in search of wealth, slaves, and a fountain of eternal youth, only to be repelled by the Calusa Indians. In 1528, another Spanish expedition seeking plunder landed in Florida, but the men became separated from their ships, and only 4 of them made it back to Mexico. For 7 years, the 4 survivors wandered through the lands of native peoples from Florida to the desert of the Southwest and northern Mexico. One, Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, wrote an account of his adventures, including tales told by native inhabitants of the 7 golden cities of Cibola, somewhere over the horizon. One of the 4 survivors was an enslaved African named Esteban. After walking all the way to Mexico with Cabeza de Vaca in 1536, Esteban returned north, leading the expedition of Friar Marcos de Niza. Esteban went farther north than Niza, becoming the first African and first non-Indian to explore parts of northern Mexico and Arizona and the pueblos of New Mexico. In the late 1530s and 1540s, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo explored the Pacific coast as far north as present-day Oregon, and expeditions led by Hernando de Soto, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, and others marched through the Gulf region in the southwest, fruitlessly searching for another Mexico or Peru. Coronado followed Esteban's path to the interior of the continent, reaching as far north as the Great Plains, and became the first European to encounter the immense herds of bison that roamed the west. The Coronado and De Soto expeditions spread devastation among native communities, but they were unsuccessful in their quest for riches, and most of them did not make it out alive. In the first area to be colonized by the Spanish in what became today's United States was Florida, where the Spanish wiped out the French settlers in the hope of preventing further French colonization and ending piracy in nearby waters. Despite considerable Spanish efforts to build towns and forts and convert the Indians, the Spanish presence in Florida remained small. By around 1600, New Spain had become a vast empire stretching from modern day American Southwest areas through Mexico and Central America and into the former Inca kingdom in South America. And we can see that some of the early Spanish exploration from this map. In the southwest in 1598, the first major Spanish expedition in the area, led by Juan de Onate, searched for fabled minerals, but when attacked by natives of Acoma in present-day New Mexico, the Spaniards retaliated by killing and enslaving the native inhabitants. Women and children were consigned to forced servitude, while men were subjected to the cutting off of one foot. Onate was recalled by the Spanish authorities because of his brutal methods and failure to find gold, and a period of more stable colonial rule was initiated with the establishment of New Mexico and its capital, Santa Fe. By 1680, a small number of mostly mestizo Spanish colonists ruled over the Pueblo Indians of New Mexico. Tensions arose over the colonists' exploitation of the Indians' labor and their increasingly harsh efforts to convert them and eliminate indigenous religious practices and beliefs. Among other factors, this led to a successful revolt that year, which drove the Spanish from New Mexico and restored native autonomy. Led by Pope, a religious leader who had earlier been arrested by the Spanish for sorcery, the Pueblos attacked and nearly wiped out the entire population of Spanish colonists, in the process destroying all the symbols and icons of Spanish culture and Catholicism they could find. A dozen years later, cooperation between Pueblo peoples disintegrated and the Spanish reconquered New Mexico for good. The Pueblo Revolt was the most complete victory for Native Americans over Europeans and the only wholesale expulsion of settlers in the history of North America. Though it was victorious in the end, the incident caused Spain to rethink its practices and institute more tolerance for traditional religion, as well as a decreased demand on Indian labor in the 18th century. So that's the end of our fifth section, and we'll go from there. Okay, see you guys.